Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin, and this is Life, Liberty, and Levin Sunday. Two great guests, Speaker Mike Johnson and General Jack Keane, and we'll get to them in a moment. I want to build a little bit on what I discussed with you last night on Saturday, Life, Liberty, and Levin. This issue of immigration and its impact on the nation. First, I want to quote Aristotle to you. Who's Aristotle? Aristotle is probably one of the greatest geniuses to ever live. And so much of philosophy and thinking and scholarship is built on what Aristotle wrote so long ago. When it comes to immigration, he said a radical change in the character of the citizens would be tantamount to regime change, just as surely as a revolution in its political principles. I've been talking about the left, the Democrat Party, using immigration for revolution. That is to fundamentally alter our nation. That's exactly what they're doing. Government is obliged to limit immigration to the most likely to improve and contribute to the well-being of our civil society. I think we forget the purpose of immigration. The purpose of immigration is to serve the citizenry of the United States, not to change the citizenry of the United States, not to change the United States, but to serve the purposes of the current citizenry of the United States. That's important. Preservation of the nation's culture, the nation's mores and language and traditions and customs that make possible a harmonious community of citizens. Assimilation is key. None of this is going on in America right now. None of it has gone on in America in the last several decades. President Trump is trying to fix that. I want you to look at your Declaration of Independence. It always has such sound thinking, even though it's short and sweet. It says in part, to secure these unalienable rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. It is the right of the people to alter or abolish, that is, the government, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem to affect their safety and happiness. We're the sovereign. You don't get to change the sovereign. You don't get to rule against the sovereign. You don't get to impose your will on the sovereign in any form, let alone through immigration. Have we, the governed, we, the people, consented to mass migration that's taking place? No. We voted for a president, and we have to oppose what's taking place. He's doing exactly that. And we oppose this mass migration that's been imposed on us by the Democrats, Biden, and their ilk. Also, do you feel safer and happier as a result of mass migration, mass illegal immigration? That's your Declaration of Independence. That's the basis of what our country is supposed to be. So I thought what I'd do is let you know that in past generations, in fact, there have been laws passed, the basic laws, the Immigration and Nationalization Act, really the most basic aspect of it passed in 1952 and amended since then. It's Title IX of the U.S. Code. There's law after law, provision after provision, section after section on how immigration is supposed to be conducted, but you wouldn't know it the way the Democrats and the media speak. And it is that law that President Trump and his administration are using and trying to use to get us back to where immigration is supposed to be. For example, 8 U.S. Code, Section 1325, proper entry by aliens. Now, it's a long provision, but let me just read this part. In proper time or place, avoidance of examination or inspection, misrepresentation and concealment of facts. Any alien who, 1, enters or attempts to enter the United States at any time or place other than as designated by immigration officers, or 2, eludes examination or inspection by immigration officers, or 3, attempts to enter or obtains entry to the United States by a willfully false or misleading representation or the willful concealment of a material fact, shall, for the first commission of any such offense, in other words, it's a crime to come in here illegally, be fined under Title 18 or imprisoned not more than 6 months, or both. And for a subsequent commission of any such offense, you do it twice or more, be fined under Title 18 or imprisoned not more than 2 years, or both. So people say, well, it's just a misdemeanor, it's no big deal. You come into this country illegally, it's a crime. And you're supposed to do time or be deported. It doesn't say As the Democrats say, well, they're contributing to our society, they're picking lettuce, they're building up. They're here illegally. The law says they go. That's the law. Let's look at 8 U.S. Code, Section 1227, deportable aliens. Who's deportable? The people I just told you, just coming here illegally. Any alien in and admitted to the United States shall, upon the order of the Attorney General, be removed if the alien is within one or more of the following classes or deportable aliens. And he's delegated that. And obviously now it's been delegated. You have the DHS and so forth. Inadmissible at time of entry or of adjustment of status or violate status. Inadmissible. You come in here illegally, you're out. You're a deportable alien. Inadmissible. Present in violation of the law. If you've been here in violation of law, you're deportable. Violated non-immigrant status or condition of entry. Violators of condition of entry. Okay, you come in and there's certain conditions you have to meet. You violate those conditions, you are deportable. It's very general. It's a very powerful law in the hands of our government to control immigration, to control the aliens who come here. In general, any alien who knowingly has encouraged, induced, assisted, abetted, or aided any other alien to enter or to try to enter the United States in violation of the law is deportable. It goes on. Marriage fraud. If you get married for the purpose of becoming a citizen, you can be deported. Wow. Crimes of moral turpitude. In other words, if you expose yourself, if you violate a little kid, if you commit rape, you're out of here. Period. Aggravated felony. Alien convicted of an aggravated felony at any time after admission is deportable. High-speed flight. Driving fast to avoid an officer, you're deportable. Failure to register as a sex offender, you're deportable. Using controlled substances, violating our drug laws, you're deportable. You're a drug abuser and addict, you're deportable. Certain firearm offenses, you're deportable. And it goes on and on. Miscellaneous crimes, espionage, sabotage, treason, sedition. You know, all those wonderful River to the Sea folks who are busy protesting to overthrow the United States. Deportable. Crimes of domestic violence. Remember that guy, the MS-13 guy that was loved by the Democrats a few weeks ago? Stalking or violation of protection order. Crimes against children. Deportable. You're out of here. Violators of protective orders. Deportable. Trafficking in people. Deportable. Failure to register or falsification of documents. Deportable. And the list goes on. But you wouldn't know that following the press in this country, would you? The list of deportable offenses is long, very long. And you don't have to have committed a heinous crime, although that's certainly a deportable offense. So when you hear Democrats say, good Lord, they're just working here and doing their job, but you're here illegally, you're deportable. Exercise of power by immigration officers, you know, Border Patrol, ICE, people like that. 287.5, power and authority to interrogate and administer oaths. Any immigration officer is hereby authorized and designated to exercise anywhere in or outside the United States the power conferred by Congress, by federal law, Section 287A1, the act to interrogate without warrant any alien or person believed to be an alien concerning his or her right to be or to remain in the United States. You don't have a warrant. Well, in 99% of the cases, you don't need a warrant. Why? Because you have a federal law. Section 287B of the Act, to administer oaths and to take and consider evidence concerning the privilege of any person to enter, re-enter, pass through, or reside in the United States, or concerning any matter which is material or relevant to the enforcement of the Act and the administration of the immigration and naturalization functions of the Department. So Department personnel, ICE, Border Patrol, others, have enormous law enforcement authority to investigate, to question, to apprehend, to arrest, without going to a federal judge to get a warrant. People, hey, what about due process? You morons in Congress, this is your law. This has been the law for over 70 years, passed by Republicans and Democrats and signed by Republican and Democrat presidents. Power and authority to arrest, arrests of aliens under Section 287A2. Border Patrol agents can arrest. Air and Marine agents can arrest. Special agents can arrest. Deportation officers can arrest. ICE officers can arrest. And so forth and so on. Wow. Arrests of persons under Section 287A4 of the Act for felonies. Same individuals can arrest. And it goes on and on and on. Did you know that? No, you didn't know it because the media doesn't report it to you. And if anything, the demagogues, the politicians lie to you about this. What happens if you assault or resist a federal officer? You see what's going on in LA? You see what goes on in New York? You see what goes on in these cities? You see congressmen literally pushing, assaulting ICE officers? Let me tell you something. You don't actually have to physically touch, according to federal law, passed by Congresses, signed by presidents. You don't have to actually touch a federal law enforcement official to be held criminally liable. The only issue there is whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony. Federal law imposes serious consequences for those who assault, resist, or interfere with federal officers and employees. 18 U.S.C. 111. These offenses range from minor altercations to violent attacks, with penalties varying based on severity. The statute protects individuals performing official duties, including law enforcement agents, judges, and other governmental personnel. 18 U.S.C. 111 criminalizes a broad range of conduct against federal officers and employees engaged in official duties. It covers physical assaults, resistance, intimidation, interference, even nonviolent obstruction, Democrats, such as refusing to comply with lawful orders or blocking an officer's movement, can lead to prosecution. Goes on, physical assaults can range from minor contact, like pushing or grabbing, to violent attacks involving weapons or serious bodily harm. The law does not require injury for charges to be filed. Any intentional, forceful act against a federal officer is sufficient for a felony. Threats and intimidation, even without physical contact, may also constitute a violation, a felony, if they place the officer in reasonable fear of harm. In United States versus Fiola, 1975, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that a defendant can be convicted under this law even if the defendant is unaware that the victim was a federal officer, reinforcing the statute's protective intent. Let's look at felony violations involving bodily injury or dangerous weapon, bringing significantly harsher penalties. An assault resulting in bodily injury can lead to a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. Cases involving a dangerous weapon or an attempt to inflict serious harm can result in similar sentencing outcomes. This is federal law. Federal law. The Democrat Party militia that's out there, what they've been doing in LA, at the encouragement, at the urging of the mayor of LA, the governor of California, going around calling these ICE agents all kinds of horrific names, encouraging people to oppose these ICE agents, encouraging people to undermine our immigration laws. The President of the United States is not only within his authority, according to our own history, is obligated to back up his ICE officers, whether it's the National Guard, whether it's regular military, whether it's the United States Marines, or whatever it is. Whatever it is. This is law enforcement. Now, this is the enforcement side that the Democrats are trying to destroy. They want you to believe nobody should be deported. Or they'll say something like, they're actually deporting people who are law-abiding. Well, how are they law-abiding if they're here illegally? Or they're actually deporting people who provide us with services. So they have 1,000 excuses. I also like the one, they're actually going at the Home Depot, the 7-Eleven. They're going into community centers. They're going into restaurants. They're going into churches. They're going... In other words, you're not allowed to go anywhere to find the illegal aliens. Then we have a nut judge out in LA who says it's racist because they're targeting certain racial communities. No, they're not. They're going into certain communities. Race is not a factor, even though the community might, say, be a Haitian community or a Central American community or a God knows what community. They're going to enforce the law in whatever community the community is. So this is the back end of what the Democrats have done and what they're doing. They don't want enforcement, but they don't want immigration laws at all. We suffered through the Biden regime, and what took place during the Biden regime violated virtually every aspect of our federal immigration laws. They used the parole system to bring in as many illegal aliens as they could. They didn't vet people. They offered people the opportunity to have work visas, even though they were here illegally. I can go down the line, resulting in millions and millions of people coming here who've never been vetted. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they are. And they're roaming the countryside. And that includes, obviously, criminals. Why wouldn't they come? Fentanyl has poured over our borders. Illegal weapons have poured over our borders. You've got sex trafficking. We don't even know how many women have been sold into pornography and sex trafficking. We have 320,000 missing unaccompanied minors. The administration is trying to find as many as they can. This is the inhumanity of open borders. This is the inhumanity of not enforcing our immigration laws. And the Democrats, who do they defend? Khalil, who's pushing for the overthrow of our country, who's scaring the hell out of Jewish students at Columbia University. Poor Khalil. Or this other guy, Garcia, out of Maryland, MS-13 trafficking, and of course a wife beater. That's who they hold up. They don't want anyone deported. They don't want any security at the border for the reasons I said last night on this program. This is about changing the American citizenry. This is about empowering the Democrat Party, one-party rule, and so forth and so on. And you'll remember about a year ago, and I'm citing National Review, the numbers that came out, which was this: 662,000 illegal aliens who entered had a criminal conviction. This was under the Biden regime, or awaiting a verdict in a criminal case. 13,000 convicted murders, more than 15,000 convicted of sexual assaults, more than 2,500 convicted of kidnapping, more than 62,000 convicted of other types of assault. Wow. I don't think they're picking our lettuce, do you? As of July 2024, the 662,000 illegal immigrants with the criminal history, 435,000 and change are convicted criminals, 226,000 and change illegal immigrants face pending criminal charges in the United States. Among those not in ICE detention, 425,000 and change convicted criminals, 222,000 with pending criminal charges. We have 14,000 were convicted of burglary, 13,000 convicted of homicide, as I just mentioned, an additional 2,500 kidnapping convictions, 15,800 sexual assault convictions. But don't worry, they're future Democrats. That's the point. They're going to have children who become citizens and their birthright citizenship. They'll be Democrats too. The Democrat Party is all in, baby. They're all in. So I wanted you to know at least a summary understanding that there are a lot of laws out there that support what President Trump is doing, that support our ICE agents and our Border Patrol. And it's the Democrat Party that has eviscerated our laws in terms of who can come, how they can come, when they can come, and are eviscerating or trying to our laws in terms of enforcing the immigration laws. It is they and their judges who are undermining the Constitution and the rule of law and the reason for this country, the Declaration of Independence. It is they who are doing it.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.